A waitress says to the billionaire, "Hi, sir, my mother has a ring just like yours." But what happened next will surprise you. What if a simple conversation in a small-town diner unlocked a secret that could change everything you thought you knew about family? What if a ring, just a ring, became the key to healing old wounds and unearthing buried truths? This is a story about loss, love, and the ties that bind us even when we don't know it yet. James Thornton sat in the corner booth of Rosie's Diner, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the floors were sticky, and the patrons were too tired to care about the man in the tailored coat. At 52, he was a billionaire whose name adorned hospital wings and university halls. But tonight, he was just a man nursing a cold cup of coffee, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past. His wife, Claire, had been gone for 3 years now. A car accident that stole her laughter and left him with a house too big and a heart too broken. Since then, he'd traded boardrooms for back roads, seeking solace in places where his wealth meant nothing, where people's stories were raw and real. Rosie's Diner was one such place. Tucked off a lonely highway in upstate New York, it was a haven for truckers, drifters, and locals who knew each other's secrets but never spoke them aloud. James liked it here. The chipped mugs, the faded wallpaper, the way the world seemed to slow down. He didn't come for the food. He came for the fleeting moments of connection, the snippets of other people's lives that reminded him he wasn't the only one carrying pain. Across the diner, Emily Harper wiped down a counter, her apron stained with grease and her brown eyes heavy with exhaustion. At 28, she was a single mother and a veteran, her army days long behind her, replaced by endless shifts and a toddler who called her Mama with a smile that made it all worthwhile. Her life was a balancing act, bills piling up, a leaking apartment roof, and a heart that still ached for the mother she'd lost to addiction years ago. Emily didn't talk about Mary much, but she carried her mother's memory in a small silver ring she wore on a chain around her neck, a ring etched with a delicate ivy pattern, a relic of a life that had slipped through her fingers. James noticed her before she spoke to him. Not because she was striking, she was plain in a way that was beautiful for its honesty, but because of the way she moved, like someone who'd learned to keep going no matter how heavy the weight. When she approached his booth to refill his coffee, her voice was soft but steady. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours," she said, nodding at the silver band on his right hand. The words were casual, but they hit James like a freight train. He froze, his fingers tightening around the mug. The ring was Claire's, a twin to the one he'd given her when they were young and reckless, before wealth and tragedy had reshaped their lives. It was a simple band, etched with ivy, a symbol of the love they'd promised would outlast everything. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Emily hesitated, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Your ring," she said, touching the chain at her neck where her own ring hung. "It's just like my mom's. She used to wear it all the time, said it was from someone special." James's heart pounded. It couldn't be a coincidence. Not the ring, not the ivy pattern, not the way her words stirred a memory he'd buried deep. "Your mother," he said carefully. "What was her name?" "Mary," Emily replied, her voice softening. "Mary Harper." The name was a knife to his chest. Mary Harper, Claire's childhood friend, the one who'd been there through their teenage years, the one who'd drifted away as addiction took hold. James hadn't thought of her in decades, but now her name was a thread pulling him back to a past he'd tried to forget. James didn't sleep that night. Back in his hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed, Claire's ring heavy on his finger. Mary Harper. The name echoed in his mind, dragging up memories of a time when life was simpler, when he and Claire were just two kids in love, and Mary was the friend who'd shared their laughter and their secrets. They'd all grown up in the same small town, a place where everyone knew everyone, where promises felt eternal. Mary had been vibrant once, with a laugh that could light up a room and a heart that loved fiercely. But life had been cruel to her. Poverty, bad choices, and a battle with addiction that tore her family apart. James remembered the last time he'd seen Mary, at his and Claire's wedding. She'd been sober then, or so she'd said, her smile strained but genuine as she hugged Claire and pressed a small box into her hands. Inside was the twin to Claire's ring, another silver band with the same ivy pattern, a gift to symbolize their unbreakable bond. "So you'll always have me with you," Mary had said. Claire had worn it every day until the accident. But Mary's life had unraveled after that. Claire had tried to help, money, rehab, endless phone calls. But addiction was a beast that didn't let go. Mary disappeared, and Claire never stopped blaming herself for not doing more. When Claire died, James had buried that guilt along with her, locking away the pain of their fractured past. Now Emily's words had ripped it all open again. The next evening, James returned to the diner. He didn't know why, not exactly. Only that he needed to see Emily again, to understand the connection that felt too precise to be chance. The diner was busier tonight, the hum of conversation filling the air, but Emily was there, moving between tables with the same quiet grace. When she saw him, she offered a small smile, but there was a question in her eyes. "Back again?" she asked, setting a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "Couldn't stay away," James said, trying to keep his tone light. "That ring you mentioned, it's been on my mind." Emily's hand went to the chain around her neck, her fingers brushing the ring hidden beneath her shirt. "It's all I have left of her," she said quietly. "She wasn't perfect, but she was my mom." James nodded, his throat tight. "Tell me about her." Emily hesitated, then sat across from him during a rare lull in her shift. She told him about Mary, how she'd been a singer once with a voice that could hush a room, how she'd fought to stay clean for Emily's sake but always fell back into the bottle or worse. How Emily, at 16, had come home to find her mother, gone, the apartment empty except for the ring and a note that said, "I'm sorry, Em. Keep this safe." Emily had been on her own ever since, clawing her way through life, enlisting in the army to escape, only to come back to the same small town with a daughter of her own, and dreams that felt further out of reach every day. James listened, his heart aching with every word. He saw Claire and Emily's resilience in the way she spoke of love and loss with equal weight. But there was something else, a nagging suspicion he couldn't shake. The ring wasn't just a memento, it was a clue, a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. Over the next week, James became a regular at Rosie's. He'd sit in the same booth, order the same coffee, and talk to Emily whenever her shift allowed. Their conversations grew deeper, weaving through stories of loss and survival. James shared pieces of his life with Claire, how they'd built a fortune together but never outran the shadow of her death, how he'd given up everything, but his grief. Emily in turn spoke of her daughter, Lily, a 3-year-old with her grandmother's eyes and the weight of raising her alone. But the ring was the thread that bound them. James couldn't let it go. He began to piece together the timeline. In his mind, Mary's disappearance, Claire's guilt, the years that had passed in silence. One night after the diner had emptied out, he asked Emily the question that had been burning in him since that first night. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency, "when was your mother born?" She frowned, caught off guard. 1968. Why? James's heart skipped. Mary was older than Claire by a year, but the math didn't add up. Emily was 28, born in 1997. Claire and James had married in 1995, and Claire had never mentioned a child. But Mary had been around then, drifting in and out of their lives. A memory flashed. Claire, crying after a late-night call from Mary, saying she'd failed her, but refusing to explain why. "Emily," James said, his voice barely above a whisper, "did your mother ever talk about my wife, Claire Thornton?" Emily's eyes widened. "Claire? Yeah, she mentioned her sometimes. Said they were best friends growing up, like sisters. Mom always got sad when she talked about her, like she'd let her down." James's hands trembled. He pulled out his phone and showed Emily a photo of Claire, young and smiling, her ring glinting on her finger. Emily's breath caught. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the Claire my mom talked about. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't fit, yet. James needed answers, and he knew where to find them. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man who'd worked for him before, and gave him everything he had: Mary's name, Emily's birth year, the ring. Within days, the investigator returned with a file that changed everything. Mary Harper had given birth to Emily in 1997, but the father listed on the birth certificate was a name James didn't recognize, a drifter who'd passed through Mary's life briefly. But there was more. A letter, tucked away in county records, written by Mary to Claire in 1996. It was short but devastating. "I'm pregnant, Claire. It's his. I can't tell him. He's married to you now. I'm sorry." James read the letter again and again, his world tilting. Claire had known. She'd known Mary was pregnant, known the child was his, and she'd kept it from him. Why? To protect him? To protect their marriage? Or because Mary had begged her to keep the secret? The truth was a wound, sharp and deep, but it was also a revelation. Emily was his daughter. James didn't go to the diner the next day. He couldn't face Emily, not yet. Not with the truth burning a hole in his chest. He spent hours pacing his hotel room, the letter crumpled in his hand. He was angry, at Claire for keeping the secret, at Mary for running, at himself for not seeing the signs. But more than that, he was terrified. Emily didn't know. She'd grown up without a father, without a family, because of choices he hadn't even known he'd made. When he finally returned to Rosie's, it was late, the diner nearly empty. Emily was wiping down tables, her movements slower than usual, like she was carrying her own weight of worry. When she saw him, her face lit up, then faltered. "You okay?" she asked. James took a deep breath. "Emily, we need to talk." They sat in his booth, the ring on his finger and the one around her neck glinting under the fluorescent lights. He told her everything: Mary's letter, Claire's secret, the truth about her father. Emily listened, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. When he finished, tears were streaming down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "You're saying, you're my father?" she asked, the word foreign on her tongue. James nodded, his own eyes wet. "I didn't know, Emily. I swear I didn't know." For a moment there was silence, heavy and raw. Then Emily stood, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked out the back door. James didn't follow. He knew she needed space, just as he did. But the truth was out, and there was no going back. Days passed, then weeks. Emily didn't quit her job, but she avoided James's booth, her smiles tight and her words few. James kept coming, not to push her, but because he couldn't stay away. He'd lost too much already, and now that he'd found her, he wasn't letting go, not unless she told him to. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the diner's windows, Emily approached his table. She didn't sit, but she held out the chain with her mother's ring. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Mom, about Claire, about you. I'm angry, so angry at all of it, but I don't want to be anymore." James looked up, hope flickering in his chest. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to know you," she said simply. "Not the billionaire, not the man in the fancy coat, just you. And I want you to know Lily. She deserves a grandfather." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next months, James and Emily rebuilt what had been broken before it could even begin. He met Lily, a whirlwind of curls and giggles, and saw Claire in her smile, Mary in her eyes. He helped Emily with her bills, not as charity but as a father, and she let him, slowly letting down her walls. They talked about Mary, about Claire, about the mistakes and the love that had shaped them all. James funded a community center in Mary's name, a place for people fighting addiction to find support, to honor the woman who'd given him a daughter he never knew he had. Emily started taking night classes, dreaming of a future beyond the diner, and James was there cheering her on. 1 year later, James sat at Rosie's diner, but this time he wasn't alone. Emily was across from him, Lily on her lap, coloring a picture of a house with a big tree out front. The rings, his and Emily's, still glinted, symbols of a past that had hurt, but also healed. The diner was the same, but they were different, bound by a truth that had nearly destroyed them but instead gave them a family. As Lily giggled and Emily smiled, James felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. The wealth he'd chased, the grief he'd carried, the secrets that had defined him. They were all part of him, but they weren't all of him. The real wealth was here, in the laughter of a little girl, in the strength of a daughter he'd found, in the courage to start again. And as the jukebox played a soft tune, James knew this was what Claire would have wanted. Not a life of regret, but one of redemption, of love stitched back together, one diner conversation at a time.